Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to Construction PM Principles and Tips. Today we're going to be talking about the short game versus the long game, or also finite thinking versus infinite thinking. So let's get into it. When you think about golf, it involves being really well at a number of things. And one of them is what they would call the short game. That's like your chipping and your putting. And the other is the long game. That's your driving and intermediate shots. And if you're really good at driving the long game, but you're not very good at the short game, you're still not going to be, a really good, well-rounded golfer, or vice versa. If you're really good at the short game, but you really can't drive the ball that accurately or that far, then you're going to be very limited at how good you are. And I think about that when I think about projects and I think about businesses and how they're run and the things that we think about, right? So thinking more in immediate versus thinking into the future. That's the short game. And sometimes, we do need to do those things. We need to think on the short term. We need to solve problems that have come up and that need our attention very readily. But everything has pluses and minuses, and taken to extremes, it can cause us a lot of problems in being successful in managing projects, businesses, and in our personal life too, and our levels of satisfaction and happiness. So when we apply goals, you need to think both the short and the long game, and systems. That's one of the things that can free up some time for us. If we build in some really good systems into how we do things, it'll free up some time so that maybe the short game doesn't take so much of our attention, because that's what happens a lot of the time is we get rooted down in responding and reacting to all these short term immediate kind of things that we need to take care of versus the longer things that'll benefit us over time. And so we also should be thinking in terms of time and money, both long and short-term benefits. Sometimes we invest things, but we don't reap the rewards for a very long time, so we don't see the value in it and we don't take those actions. And that can be negative or provide negative consequences to us over the long term. So there's a lot of implication and risks to, if we just only focused in on the long term, then there'd be a lot of immediate things that wouldn't get taken care of, and that would be problematic, right? So it takes a real balance of those particular areas. And if we want to think about it, the short game, banks' financial crisis of 2008, there was a lot of focus on short-term profitability. A lot of publicly traded companies run into this, where everything is about what's coming up in the next quarter. Leaders are promoted and are rewarded by what just happened in this quarter. But that allows companies to take their mind off the ball, and instead of thinking about the longer game, like Kodak, who invented the digital camera, focusing on film, and they're really good at film in the mid-90s, took their eye off the ball for the long game, and next thing you know, they're out of business or they're bankrupt. People overspending. So it's the short game. What kind of immediate buzz do I get out of this new shiny object that I just purchased? Well, that's the short game thinking. I get this immediate high adrenaline buzz when I purchase this fancy new car that maybe I shouldn't have. Versus the long game, then if I'm really focused on the short game, then the long game, I can't retire. I've got to keep working. I've got to keep doing these things, or I'm heavily in debt and it's causing me all this stress. I'm really indebted to my job and I can't move and I don't have very little flexibility. Companies, get it done, get it done, get it done, but you don't really invest in your people in the training because they didn't never stay with us. Well, why do they never stay with you? Because you're not investing in them. They don't see the value in this company that they're working for, and so they're more apt to leave. And in the construction industry right now, if you're not investing in your people, you've got a big problem, because we are short of good people. We have a lot of people retiring. The average age of a construction worker is pretty high. We've also got to attract people to our industry. So those companies that actually invest in their people, they're doing much better because they're attracting the best people. They're retaining the best people. If you attracted a really good person and didn't invest in them, then you've got a higher likelihood that they'll leave you. And that's going to cause you a lot of problems in the long run. May not in the short run, but it'll definitely cause you a lot of problems in the long run. Not investing in new technologies that enable your competitiveness. We see how the world is changing. So that could be in new equipment, layout equipment, scanning equipment, building information modeling, and making sure that your company is keeping up. Now, in the short term, it might be a distraction. It might take extra time. It might cost extra money. It might reduce your profits. But in the long term, done right, invested in the right technologies, not the wrong technologies, it will advance your firm. It will make you more competitive. And it, again, your people will feel more engaged when they've been properly trained to be able to utilize that equipment. The long game, some companies have played the long game. Disney would be one company that has lasted a number of generations, right? And they've been at the top of their game. And if they start to go down, then they start investing. Look at what they've done with basically Marvel Comics and some of the advances that they've made in those particular areas, or the Star Wars franchise and advancing that. So there's been a lot of investment, but also adjustments and change that they've had to deal with over the generations to ensure that they have and position themselves in a very good way, positive way. And remember, you're only as good as what you've most recently done. So what I'm saying now, in a few years, you might look at and say, they didn't keep up with things. So this is a constant process. And this is where we would think about things in a more infinite process instead of a finite process, which I'll get into in the next slide. Amazon, ensuring that you take risk but don't bet the company. So that's been some of their investments. They take a lot of risks. They've invested in a lot of things, and a lot of them weren't successful, but a lot of them are. They just have to hit certain ones. If they weren't constantly striving and trying for those improvements or developing in related areas, they wouldn't be where they are. And so, yeah, you don't want to bet the company on something, especially when you're a successful company like them, but a number of small bets is going to reap a certain amount of rewards as some of them come through with probabilities, well-developed probabilities. People over saving but not enjoying the fruits of their labor. Well, you know what? Playing the long game can also be negative. If you're going to just save all and hoard all your money and just sort of not do anything and not enjoy your life, life is unpredictable. So there should be some short game investments. You should be thinking some things that I want to do this trip. We want to have this experience. We want to have this particular car. That's fine as long as you've given it some thought and you're also keeping your eye on the long game as well. So you don't want to only I'm going to do all my trips when I retire, and then by the time you reach retirement age, you have problems and you can't do those trips, or you don't reach that age, then that would be kind of a waste as well. So it's really about everything in moderation when we think about things in those terms. Investing in your people, that is the long game. Retention, relationships, it's going to have more aspects of improvements in relationships and productivity. And you know what? Investing in your people, that's going to bring you more joy in your work. That's going to make you more passionate about what you do. And that's the system side of things. You're looking at the system, not always the goals, the short-term goals, because goals finish. And then what happens when you finish that goal? But if you build in systems that take you through the infinite game, the longer game of your career, then that can be a much more positive attribute because you enjoy the journey. It's not the destination, it's the journey. And the aspect of the long game is more about the journey. Investing in technologies, again, if you actually invest in the right ones, it's just the reverse of what I said with the short ones. It's going to improve you over the long term. There may be some pain points in that with cost, with time, with learning, learning new things. Sometimes it can stretch you, but it also can be a little bit on the negative side, causes a little bit of anxiety stretching yourself. But if you don't make those investments, basically no pain, no gain. The longer term, you're going to have more pain in than you would have otherwise. I have brought together a lot of thinking over the last year. I did one of these videos very early on when I developed the YouTube channel, but I didn't include these because I've read these books since then, and sort of this finite and infinite games. This one, it might be a little bit it's not for everyone, I would say, but it definitely gets you thinking about things and life in terms of, there's certain, we sometimes treat everything as this very sort of closed game, and sometimes goals too, very closed game, that we're going to be happy when we get to this point. But usually when you get to this point, you're not. Whereas opposed to thinking in terms of infinite, right? So not thinking about this game, thinking about this process, and thinking about learning to better for the sake of learning and enjoying the journey becomes more fruitful from that perspective. And a more current, up-to-date version would be Simon Sinek's book that he recently released, which was based on this. He really refers to this book a lot. That's why once I read this, I thought I should read this after the fact. The infinite game, and really thinking in terms of infinite thinking instead of finite thinking. So finite thinking, construction, we've got this project, that's all we need to think about. When we get done, it's over. But the problem is, if you think about your relationships that you're building in this project, you're building relationships with trades, vendors, with consultants, with clients. And if you just think about one and done, you're going to do certain things that, yeah, it would benefit you on this project, but it's not going to benefit you in the long term. You might burn potential long-term relationships because of some of your actions that would benefit you short term, but in the long term, no. Because if you have a trade partner that no longer wants to work with you because of how you interacted with them, or you have a client that you made certain decisions on that you contractually, you might have been correct, but you really drove it home and that kind of upset them. And then in the future, they prefer to do work with somebody else. That's not really good thinking on your part, because yeah, you could, this saved you this X amount of money, but you lost the opportunity to make numerous projects in the future. That opportunity, there's a huge opportunity cost related to that. So I think a lot of times it's surprising to me how often interactions with trade partners, they're thinking very short term. Like it's like, this is it, and this is what we're, and they're trying to do certain things that are very negative, and they're not communicating it that well. Same thing with GCs to clients, or vice versa to trade partners. You got to be thinking about, well, this is a long-term relationship. Let's not make it personal. Let's make it about this contract, and let's see what we can do, that we can work, that we have satisfied parties on both sides, so that overall we have win-win relationships. It's very important that way. Certainly in sports, we might be thinking about this game because it's really important. We're in the middle of hockey season right now. Leafs are, going after a shot that they haven't had in 55 years. And there is a big opportunity with this next game. We have to look at the short game in those instances, but we also have to look at things from a longer term perspective, and that's infinite thinking about things longer term. And I've thought about this before with the Eisenhower matrix, and I've talked about this in a few of my videos, so I won't belabor it too much, but I will say, when we're thinking about things, if this is kind of important and urgent. When I talk about short and long-term thinking, well, important and urgent, that's very short-term, right? Important, not urgent, that's long-term. And so we definitely, overall, from a stress point of view on projects, we're reacting to things if we have a lot of important and urgent things. And that maybe puts us in a mindset that's not best for relationship building, because we're usually reacting to something that's happened and we have to fix it. Right? The sweet spot is really definitely to grow this particular area, right? The goal is to make this as large as possible. And these ones over here, the not important and urgent and not urgent and not important, you got to decide what those actually are for you and try to maximize in this. This is playing the long game when you actually maximize this out. When we focus on this less so, or we have to react to things less so, that can be well done. Now, important and urgent can mean doing the day-to-day things that you need to do to complete your project. So you definitely need this from that perspective. These two here, they could be definitely shrunk to a certain extent, especially this one. This one could be pretty useful if you are doing it to build the long game relationships. So sometimes that's helping somebody, spending some extra time in that particular area to help them grow, to engage them, especially if you're a project manager, a site superintendent, that sort of thing. That can be very, very helpful. Being proactive so that you're not reacting to so many things can be helpful too, but also thinking beyond. This is where I would take it beyond my typical Eisenhower matrix discussion, taking it to what are the things that I need to do personally to grow myself in my career over the next 5 years or 10 years or even 1 year. That's going to take more investment. That's a longer game thinking than just what am I doing in the next 6 weeks or the next week or today. Not that I forget about that stuff, but I've got to be working on this as well if I really want to get to those higher levels in my career and be successful from that perspective. So that can be helpful, that kind of thinking. So I would encourage you in your careers and in your projects to be thinking in these terms of building long, strong relationships. Before you come down on somebody that maybe shouldn't be come down on that way, to be thinking about, well, this might be a longer term relationship and this is an opportunity to practice this and build these sustainable relationships with infinite thinking, career thinking, as opposed to just short term, this one interaction. Because you will be surprised in our industry how much you interact with other sectors in multiple projects and you run into the same people over and over again, playing the long game, building those relationships, making decisions based not just on the current situation, but also future potential relationships. Very, very important. And so I would call to you to think, seeing we're in hockey season, as Gretzky was famous for saying, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And so I would also think about not just short-term thinking, not just finite thinking, but a little bit more on the infinite long game thinking, and thinking that our careers, it's a journey, not a destination. The relationships we build over that time period can reap a lot of rewards in terms of enjoyment, engagement, joy in working with the people around you. So I'm Tom Stephenson. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click subscribe and notifications. You can check my playlists on my YouTube channel, and I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can link with me there as well. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.